James, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Things go from bad to worse for Sir Keir Starmer and his gang of hapless, hopeless cabinet ministers. You know, the economy appears to be plunging into a downward spiral of debt, high interest rates and higher prices as well, and inflation. Meanwhile, the grooming gang saga continues. The vote last night was received, I can say, probably the most badly as I've ever seen a vote received by the general public. People can't quite believe that Labour are so intransigent on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. On the grooming point, I think that it was clearly not a great day in Parliament. Both sides yelling shame at each other in the House of Commons at Prime Minister's questions. And then, of course, the vote was defeated by a massive majority because Labour has so many MPs in Parliament. Yeah. No great surprise there, but I think that it's going to be something that keeps on coming up. And you already see Tory attack ads making the point that they were the ones who voted against inquiry. And I think it'll come an election time, will be used as a stick against them. Right,
but isn't it interesting as well that Starmer and a sort of handful of his cabinet colleagues decided to abstain?
Well, I mean, normally the Prime Minister has a terrible voting record, whoever's in charge, because they frankly have to be doing lots of other things, lots of meetings in the evening, sometimes summits, and we know Keir Starmer likes his summits, etc. And also there are stuff like, you know, he might have had a security briefing or some such. I don't know what his plans were last night, but I mean, I'm not surprised from a political point of view that, as you say, that he was not there for the vote. Why would you want your hands on this? But that being said, it is worth pointing out that for most Prime Ministers, they will not be there for most votes most of the time.
No, indeed. But many people are seeing it as a way of him kind of being sort of gilding the lily down the road to say, well, I didn't actually vote to stop there being a public inquiry. I just ordered all my MPs to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be some within Labour who wonder if it could have been handled a bit better, and there'll probably be some who feel a bit aggrieved by how this whole process has played out over the past week. And of course, it's notable that the Lib Dems, those arch mercenaries in ideology and Southern votes, also all chose en masse as a block of 72 to abstain, and I think that shows that they're also thinking similar political considerations about not being seen to have voted down this inquiry.
Right. I mean, there are quite a few pieces in the papers this morning about the likelihood of Keir Starmer wobbling on this, and the likelihood that Jess Phillips kind of hinted that it might well be possible for there to be an inquiry. Do you think they will wobble? Do you think there will eventually be some kind of investigation of some sort or other set up?
I think there could be potential in aspects, but I don't think it'll be a big sort of national inquiry stretching many years, as we're seeing with the COVID inquiry, or we saw with the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. I mean, I was at the lobby briefing yesterday, and you know, Keir Starmer's spokesman just seems to be unable to really answer. They were sort of holding it open, but sort of not. And I think talking to people in government, the kind of sense is they don't want a full, big-blown one, but there could be kind of looking at further elements, reviewing it, and of course prosecutions. I think that's the key thing. There's a much greater willingness to pursue prosecutions than there is to open big, open questions about things that went on over the past 20 years.
Indeed. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the street, I suppose, in number 11, you've got Rachel Reeves in an awful lot of trouble financially. Front pages this morning suggesting that market turmoil is a red alert for the Chancellor. The Telegraph's got the Treasury stepping in to halt market mayhem. Toxic debt now apparently is what we are supposedly going to have to put up with. And she's off to China, I think, today, isn't she?
Yes, and I think that's going to be something that ages very badly, given we're now just 11 days from Donald Trump taking office. Well-known China skeptic has made a number of hawkish noises on China. So the question is, of course, why are we going to China? Well, frankly, the answer is to get more money. But I'm not sure the Chinese are that interested in us. If you look, for instance, chatting to someone in the Foreign Office today about this, which is, you know, the Germans for many years have tried to get more investment. The French are trying to get more investment. They're much softer in China than we are. If they haven't had much money from all of that, what chances have we got? And the answer is very little. It comes at a time, as you say, Mike, when it's basically a very bad time for the Treasury ahead of March, April. Borrowing costs have gone up, expected to go up by 10 billion or so. That means spending cuts. And also, that's not talking about defence, because Trump wants more defence. He's talking about 5% of GDP. We're still on talking about pathway to 3%.
Yes, and I mean the Mail, and I mean I know that this might be considered by some people, politically speaking, not to be a factor, but the Mail have got a picture of Rachel Reeves from Parliament yesterday, looking terribly drawn, looking terribly worn out, and looking incredibly, you know, sort of unhappy compared to the way she looked in July 2024. I mean, she does not look as if she's enjoying the job, which must have a terrible strain on her personally, apart from anything else.
I mean, it's an unchivalrous point, but it's a point I get made by Tory MPs all the time who look at Rachel Reeves in the comments and say, God, how much she's aged.
Yeah.
Often the burdens of office do that to everyone. The question is, I think that, is it as easy as someone Labour would have liked to have thought? Yes, there were a few sort of low-hanging fruit you could do on terms like wind farms, etc. But it's been very difficult, I have to say. And I look ahead to the next 6 months, and really all the indicators are that it's going to be a very long, hard, difficult spring, and certainly not the growth she promised.
Well, certainly not. And also, The Sun have got a piece saying that the prices now are likely to go up, 4.5% predicted now for many items in the shops, and they point at Greggs as a bit of a bellwether for exactly how much people spend. And it looks as though in a year the cost of a sausage roll, I know this might be sort of a pound in your pocket type stuff, but the cost of a sausage roll has risen by 25%.
I mean, extraordinary. And food prices does, as we've seen in America with Joe Biden, really have an impact.
It matters, yeah.
Absolutely, because people care very much about that. And the other thing, of course, is that as well as the prices on the street, there's also the business behind that, and all the indicators coming out of the business, whether that's the CBI or the Federation of Small Businesses, are all warning about this and saying, you've said previously, and of course you went to the CBI, Reeves, and said that she wasn't going to raise taxes. But I think there's a strong sense that there are going to have to be further tax hikes as well as spending cuts as well.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because people start to worry, and I'm being asked this question now by people who are sending me tweets and messages, it's all very well to talk about the economy crashing, but at what point does that then affect ordinary people? Say, for example, do pensions get affected? Do pension funds suddenly find themselves making no money at all? Do they go into negative? And we've seen before sometimes that you can have practically no growth in pension funds at all, which of course affects people's payouts, it affects people's livelihoods, it affects their ability to enjoy their retirement.
Yes, and they're going to be another group, I think, affected by this. And of course, it comes off the back of several policy decisions by the Labour government, most notably winter fuel, which I think is going to be not shown to be a great political move, given how it defines everything that came after. Especially one person from New Labour who said, our first act in office was to give the Bank of England independence. Their first act in office was to take away winter fuel, and I think that shapes a lot of the framing that's coming out. And so the government may have less of a hearing on this than it would otherwise had it not taken away the winter fuel.
Right. And one final scandal, as if there aren't enough in there to be getting along with, the latest from the Tulip Sadiq story is that journalists had asked about Mir Ahmad bin Qasim, a British-trained lawyer who was detained by the regime of anti-corruption minister's aunt Sheikh Hasina. It's now been confirmed, apparently, that this guy was visited by a death squad.
Yeah, charming name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very cheap. 20 or so apparently turned up to this poor man's house in Bangladesh and complained that he'd been talking, that he damaged the reputation of Bangladesh internationally from this rather unsavoury regime. And I think, the allegation did Tulip Sadiq make them aware of what went on in terms of that Channel 4 interview that this man allegedly had been talking, and did she know what was going to happen, the ramifications? Now, of course, she may have just said, hey, this is what's happened, I've been interviewed about this, and then she has no responsibility for what subsequently happened. Right. But it's deeply worrying, and I think every day there are increasing questions. We saw it in Parliament yesterday about the Royal Tulip Sadiq, another one of Rachel Reeves' ministers in Parliament.
And she's, of course, referred herself now to the parliamentary watchdog, but it's kind of ridiculous, isn't it? You've got a situation where the person who's in charge at the Home Office of the corruption agenda is now being investigated for possible corruption, given that her family in Bangladesh and her auntie in Bangladesh has been sort of chased out of government.
Yes, and the point some within Labour are making is that, hang on a sec, you sort of took out and bulleted Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, within 24 hours of old allegations, which Keir Starmer had known about for years. Why is there, if I can use the phrase, two-tier Keir on this? Right. Why does it seem that there seems to be a difference in standards? I mean, that's what a minority is saying. I think most will wait and see how the inquiry comes back, what the minister... But I would also point out that even the advisor, it was reported yesterday, will not be looking at some of the claims in Bangladesh about her being involved in an alleged corruption scandal about a power plant. So I think that even if the inquiry comes back, there may still be further questions and issues around the line. Given how this spans 2 continents and it's obviously very difficult and complex in ways, I think that this won't be the end of the matter. No,
it won't. She's a very good friend of his, apparently, and he accompanied her, in fact, to Bangladesh on a visit to said auntie when she was in charge, and he's also hosted her back here in Parliament when he was leader of the opposition. So, he's tied into this story in some ways, and maybe that's why, again, he's reluctant to push her under a bus.
And this is the question of judgment, isn't it? We can all take out our enemies, but it's about how you judge your friends when they've done something wrong. And so that's the question, I think, that people will be looking at when it comes to the ministerial sack race later this year.
Yeah, absolutely right. James, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.